Hey, what's happening, everybody? Welcome to our second Vineyard Focus series. We're honored to have Todd Harrington from Mountain Vineyard join us today. You're going to see a lot of Todd this year because Todd manages three vineyard sites for us, not only Mountain Vineyard, which we're going to talk about today, but Red Mountain Vineyard, which is also a very important vineyard for us on Red Mountain. And for those of you who love our rosé, Black Rock Vineyard is also under Todd's management. And but today we're going to focus on Mountain Vineyard. Keith is in our tasting room in Walla Walla, and if you look behind him, there's a beautiful, beautiful photo taken by a very talented photographer.
Yeah, not a live stream.
Of Mountain Vineyard. That's actually that was the fall of 18. That was such a great time frame. That vineyard just performed so well, that vintage, but it was just that perfect September, October, man. It was just great. So
well, you've got a great eye for those opportunities too, Trey. So
yeah, well, Todd, thanks again for joining us today. As I mentioned before, we'd like to dive into a little bit of your history. We've been working with you since we really started working with the vineyards, all the vineyards, and you've been a great partner along with Eduardo, your our sort of in the field vineyard guy, who hopefully is going to join us on one of these as well. But we've worked with you a long time, and you worked with Corliss a long time. So maybe just give a little bit of background. How'd you end up in Walla Walla? How'd you end up in wine? And then eventually, how'd you end up at Corliss?
Yeah, so I've been in Walla Walla almost 20 years now. First moved to town in 2005. Did my undergraduate studies here in town. At the tail end of that, was looking for some work, getting some income on the side, and started working at the Seven Hills tasting room. That was back in 2009. Did my first harvest after I had graduated from college in 2010, also at Seven Hills. And that's when I was kind of bitten by the wine bug, got my foot in the door there, and have been working in the industry ever since that 2010 harvest.
That's a good guy to work for. That's with Casey, right? Casey was still there?
So Casey McClellan, one of the big figures in my my mentor, my tutor, someone who really inspired me to keep pursuing a career in this industry, and really opened up the door for the world of wine and what's possible. And I found with Casey, finding a lot of those intellectual ways to connect with a wine, which was really another level of the business that I hadn't seen before, beyond just tasting and enjoying wine with food, but the intellectual stimulation with dissecting a wine, all the information where it came from, and all the possibilities there was what really drew me in at first. So after that 2010 harvest, I took a little bit of a hiatus. I moved over to the East Coast and was selling wine out of a wine shop in Boston. Then in 2012, came back, enrolled at the Enology and Viticulture program through Walla Walla Community College. Another proud graduate there. To get a little bit more of a formalized education on all different aspects of viticulture and winemaking. Then was first introduced to the Corliss family of brands with the 2013 harvest. Did an internship with Tranche there. That's when I first started working with Spencer, currently the winemaker out of Tranche. And eventually that internship turned into a full-time offer. There happened to be more room to grow within the company on the vineyard side, so I took a bit of a pivot from winemaking and into the vineyard, and have been with them full time on the vineyard side since 2014.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's when we first met. Was that 2014 vintage, and have since kind of grown from more of a grower relation person, dealing more with clients and contracts, to my current job of vineyard operation manager, overseeing a lot of different properties, covering at least 3 corners of the state, up in the San Juan Islands, over in the Gorge, and our main chunk of acreage under management in Eastern Washington. And it's been a great opportunity for me to grow my skill set and grow with the company. And I've met a ton of awesome people to work with, yourself included.
I love how you have, there's the formal winemaking background along with the vineyard management side of it as well. I always find they play well together. You have when winemakers are talking to vineyard managers, a lot of times it just doesn't compute in the same way. And especially some of these old school growers in Washington who have been growing for a long, long time. And, they just been the way they do things is the way they do things. And we've watched, not just you, but we've watched the vineyards that you work with and manage for us. We've watched a lot of growth and change and how we attack certain issues and problems and such. And it's nice to be able to work with you on those things and as a partner, because that's how we look at you guys for all of our vineyards. So important for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to see the whole picture, through the life cycle of the vine all the way through when it's in the bottle. The wider your eyes are, the more you can take in and keep making better decisions.
I think so. Well, let's talk about Blue Mountain Vineyard here for a second. Before I actually jump into the share screen, why don't you tell us about Blue Mountain? Give us a little bit of history on it. When was it planted? I know that we've had two major plantings up there. We've been involved with the second one, but the original vineyard was planted about the same time that you and I both got to the valley, around 2000, 2001 or so.
Yeah, you got here a little earlier than I did. So that property originally planted out in 2002. That original grounds was maybe a little less than 60 acres, and was at the time only planted to red varieties, primarily on the Bordeaux and Bordeaux blenders. But they did have Syrah as a component of that acreage as well. Was pretty cutting edge at the time. They tried to get kind of as much technology and tools as were available to them. So if that's between kind of neutron probe, irrigation, water stress management, have a really complex irrigation system that was able to fine tune and even turn on remotely, which in the early 2000s was cutting edge, more commonplace today.
Did Kenny Hart was originally involved in that back in the day?
He did. So the original property owner was Mike Newfer of Nicholas Coal Cellars, and
right.
It was contracted out to Kenny Hart for all the original planting and development. So we have Kenny to thank for setting the stage and those first few years, really getting the vines to set up and where they are today. So
was Eduardo working for Kenny at the time? Because was he originally involved in the early plantings, or did he sort of come on board a little later?
He came on a few years later. He was hired by the his name's escaping me. Stephen over at Analema was the vineyard manager in the early 2000s. Eduardo was hired in 2004 and is still managing the property. So he has worked his way from entry level all the way up to vineyard manager. And with that amount of experience and time on one property, he knows it like the back of his hand. So we're, again, very thankful for all that he brings to the table, and carrying the torch from that initial planting, really for the last 20 years.
That's awesome. And when did the new plantings were in 14? Is that right?
Yeah, we've had kind of two phases of development. We did a smaller planting, a little less than 10 acres in 2011, when we planted out more white roan varieties. And
That's
then
right.
in 2014, started expanding that property more dramatically, planted another 60 acres, really over 3 years.
And that's kind of what you see. That's what's behind Keith's head right now, is that newer stuff over there. So that picture's looking due south, essentially, with the Blue Mountains in the background. But the vines you see there are from the newer plantings. If you were to turn around and look to the north, you'd see the Tranche Winery production facility, as well as the pond, and then you'd see the older blocks over there. I'm gonna share the screen while you're talking, Todd.
Sure.
But we can take a look at, we zoom out here, we're looking at Washington State and pulling into Eastern Washington, Columbia Valley right here. Here's the Columbia River over to our west, the Snake River to our north. Here's the Walla Walla Valley. As you kind of zoom in a little bit on the Walla Walla Valley, you can see that Blue Mountain is located kind of in the northeastern part of the Walla Walla Valley, and it is in a similar way to Lake Helene Vineyard, which is at the base of the Blue Mountains. And of course, if you guys watched our Lake Helene portion, our vineyard profile series last month, you'll know it's about right here, and in this area. And then you come on, let's see, there it is right there. So that's Lake Helene right here. Literally due north is Blue Mountain Vineyard. And so if you zoom in on Blue Mountain, you can see it's butted up right next to the city of Walla Walla. It's really where the ag kind of comes in, and it's also on it's where the rolling hills really start right there. Once you get down to this flat section over here to the west, it's fairly flat, but it's right here is where you start to gain elevation. Todd, tell us about what we'll talk about the soil series and maybe talk a little bit about how elevation plays a role at the vineyard.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, we're that first hill of those kind of rolling, Palouse, kind of fluffy, loess soil type there. Just to the north of us, you've got Yellow Hawk Creek, and that's really where where the Blue Mountain and Mill Creek has cut through and washed away those lighter soils and left the valley floor, which is now where Walla Walla is. So that we have that really dramatic cut along the northeastern part of the property where that river has come through, and we're just on the uphill side of that.
That's right. This is this is the top of the vineyard right here, and the highest elevation. What's the highest elevation up there is about what?
We're at right about 1250,
okay,
1150 feet, and the lowest sections are maybe a hair above 1100.
Okay.
So we have some pretty dramatic highs and lows and steep terrain. I think about the steepest incline that we've got on the property is about a 18, maybe 20 degree at its peak. So we do have some steep hills and challenges to get over, particularly in the spring when those soils get charged with all the winter moisture. Dealing with those inclines can be one of our big challenges.
Or during harvest, as we saw last year.
Yeah, or the end of harvest, as we've seen.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, this is the aerial view of the vineyard right there, and the soil series it's Walla Walla silt loam.
Correct. So is a nice fluffy, great water holding capacity, and pretty rich for nutrient wise. So we're fortunate that we're able to rely less on irrigation and a lot of extra farming inputs, fertilizers, because that soil has such a good base of those things.
Okay.
Elevation wise, among the Palouse foothills and Lake Helene included, I think we're somewhat in the mid to lower end of that elevation range. But compared to the valley floor, we're seeing maybe a week to 10-day, I think later harvest interval for a lot of those same sites. A little bit cooler, and since we are located kind of in the foothills of the mountains, we do get kind of a pronounced wind and rainfall influence, being in such close proximity to the Blue Mountains.
And you're in that sort of 14 to 16 inches a year range. Does that sound about right?
I think we might be a hair above that. I think maybe 16 to 20.
Okay.
Last year, I think we were probably closer to 30 inches of precip, but that's more of an outlier than a normal.
Yeah.
And just quickly.
Go ahead, Keith.
Just quickly, because, I'm sitting here at the winery and we're about 780 feet here elevation. which I think this is an interesting illustration of the dramatic climb. And you don't notice it just visiting one time to Walla Walla, but this is there's a big difference between 780 feet elevation and 1,100 to 1,200 feet elevation. So one thing, Todd, quickly, can you touch on, because we talk about it a lot, but I'd love to hear your perspective, particularly from a frost and freeze management and protection aspect. What do you see up there at Blue Mountain? The influence of Yellowhawk Creek right there, and as far as those hard freezes and the untimely frost, because we are certainly in a frost-prone spot down here at the winery. Even though we're warmer most of the year, we're much more likely to have cold damage.
Yeah, so site selection is always a big part of picking a vineyard site, and this one in particular has served us really well to be protected from really those Canadian or polar cold air masses that come and can kill vines back down to the ground. I'd say from a frost perspective, there's kind of micro events and macro events. The micro being, small spring and fall frosts that are threatening shoot tips or canopy, and kind of cutting that single year short. And that's where really having good air drainage within the property is pretty crucial. And since we have some of those that steep terrain and large sections at the lowest elevation where we haven't planted anything, those areas are relatively safe. Then from a macro perspective, when you're looking at valley wide, as that frigid air is pooling up, I think it's protected our vines on kind of a seasonal level from having less winter kill and less cold damage in general. So again, on a small scale, having good terrain, steep hills will protect those vines from small frosts, but being at a higher elevation within the valley itself, I think has given us less winter kill, and we haven't lost a full year's crop due to killing vines down to the ground and having to retrain ever within the lifespan of this vineyard. And that includes really the hard freeze in 2004, and I know 2010 had some really cold winters as well that killed some vineyards back to the ground.
And 2017 as well.
2017, yeah. It's nice having that. That's one of the reasons that people are looking at planting more in the foothills and trying to go up in elevation to give them that added level of protection to ensure they actually have a crop. And not to mention, one of the things I love about that, the location of Blue Mountain Vineyard, not only its elevation and soils and stuff, but just the fact that it's when we're sitting here blending wines and we get Cabernet, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc from Blue Mountain. And it's a very important part of the Illusionist every year, which is our reserve Cabernet, and it's a very important part of the Archimage, which is our reserve Bordeaux blend, on top of going into the Conjurer as well, which is our everyday Bordeaux blend. But as you mentioned, we do pick a little later at that site. And so we're typically picking Red Mountain first, and then same varietal, Blue Mountain will come off a week to 2 weeks after Red Mountain will. And so not only does it give us a little bit of a break in the cellar and help us sort of extend things out and give our team time to bring stuff in and get it fermented and bring Blue Mountain in, but it also has a really beautiful acid profile. The pHs tend to be a little more imbalanced. The acidities tend to be a little bit brighter. And Keith can speak on this as well, but I always find like these Blue Mountain Vineyard, Red Mountain Vineyard are very aptly named because the fruit that comes from those two vineyards kind of falls into that profile. The fruit that we get from Blue Mountain tends to be a little darker fruited and more sort of blue fruited, and the stuff that we get from Red Mountain tends to be red fruited. Those are some of the things that I sort of pick out in the vineyard. Let me zoom in here, and maybe you can give us a little lay of the land here. So up top here, let's see if I can. Block 1 is right up here. Mm-hmm. And we have a small block of Cab Franc up here. Block 2 is right next to it, and we've got another small block of Cab Franc right in here. And as we shift down, we've got block 5 right here, which is a large, it's about a 2.5 acre block, Todd, of Cab Franc that we get up there.
At least 2 acres.
2 acres, okay.
5A there.
And then right here, this is the block 8, and this is a fairly large block of Cab Franc that we pull. And so this whole section is some of the older, this is the older block that was planted back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s.
Yeah, 2002.
When you drop down here to our binaural block, which is our, we call it our estate block because we did a long-term contract with you guys and we were able to pick the varietals and pick the clones and things of that nature. But this is the binaural block right here. The Cab Franc, we roughly 3 acres of Cab Franc, 2 different clones. Keith, we talk about the clonal selection that we have in both of those there.
Yes, so we have clone 214 and clone 327. I wasn't involved in the selection process for those, so maybe, Todd can talk about what on paper they are like. But certainly in the cellar, we find dramatic differences. Clone 214 has always cropped out a little bit better for us and been kind of this really classic Cabernet Franc profile, lots of herbal flavors to it, and just good structure, good color. It's actually pretty quickly become some of my favorite Cabernet Franc we work with. The 327 has been a little bit more of a wild card since we started working with it. Some years it's fantastic. Some years it's a little bit, it's been a little bit difficult to work with just from a crop perspective. It just doesn't give us a lot of fruit. And so when you're carrying that little amount of fruit, it just ripens in a kind of a different way. In its best years, it brings a lot of power and muscle to our wines. And in the years where it maybe hasn't performed quite as well, it's really friendly and forward and is a great component in the Conjurer. So that's kind of my contrast from a cellar perspective. Yeah, the Clone 214 for us has been an absolute star lot from the minute we started working with it.
And the old block, Todd, is it Clone 2?
Clone 1.
Clone 1 Cab Franc in the old block, and then Clone 8 Cabernet, which is, of course, everyone calls it Washington clone because it was pretty much
the workhorse.
Washington planted back in the 70s and 80s. So Clone 8 was still the king of the clones back then. Here we have, was it 191?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've worked with 191 in the past at several vineyards, and so we also have some of that up at Elaine's block.
Yep.
At Finney Hill. And so we have 2 acres of cab right here in the middle, the sort of the heart of the block. And we always felt like Blue Mountain would be a great Merlot site. This is prior to us planting this new block. And it was more in the belief that, it's a cooler site. It ripens a little later. Merlot is fairly early ripener for Bordeaux varietals. It'd be nice to get some extra hang time. And I was always surprised that Merlot wasn't originally planted, and maybe it was and it was ripped out or something in the old block up there. But I do know that when you take over old farm ground, like Mike Newford did back when he bought the property, this was farmed to wheat and peas and a bunch of other things that they threw a bunch of really nasty chemicals at for years and years and years. And so I know that Merlot is very susceptible to a lot of the residual chemicals. And thankfully, you guys prepped this land, I think, fairly well. And we haven't really seen a ton of issues in our Merlot block. But that Merlot now goes into a good chunk of the Archimage every year. It's a kind of a southeast facing slope right here. And so it doesn't get the super intense sunshine in the late afternoon towards sunset. It gets a little shaded from that, which is nice. You'll also notice that the vines are planted off of north-south. Todd, what's the thinking behind that? Because if you go and look at the some of the other blocks, actually, is even the old blocks planted just off north-south?
Yeah, so most of the vineyard we've tried to to put offset, it's about at a 30 to 33 degree angle.
Okay.
Some of that is a practical decision, just trying to work up and down the slope and minimize, if you're farming on a side hill where you have kind of stability issues for the tractor. But on a viticultural level, we've offset that to try to better catch the sunlight during the peak of the season. So the further off that north-south you are, really come the end of July or early August, since we have such long summer days and there's so much kind of intensity and heat in the afternoons of those days, by setting that offset, we're giving more protection to the fruit zone during those peak heat events. So it's shifting when the sun is directly overhead, later and later into the day, which is corresponding with those those peak temperatures.
Okay, that totally makes sense for sure.
So if it was directly north-south, you end up being really lopsided on afternoon exposure. So you're seeing more shrivel, more sunburn, just exacerbated effects of heat stress.
You think, Todd, when you talk about that, do you think, is it a big enough difference? Do you think you conserve any water with that off aspect, especially during those extreme heat events? Or are those rare enough that it's not making a big difference?
I think it certainly helps. If the vine doesn't sense that the fruit is, in jeopardy and shriveling, it's certainly better allocating its, sap flow and water resources. If anything, it is putting additional stress on the canopy during certain times. So, it might be a net zero, but I would think if the vine is not having to pull water from fruit to keep the canopy viable, you're making better use of the water resources.
I think water conservation is something that's going to become a bigger part of our conversation going forward. And so, thinking about it when we talk about these vineyards and talk about even things you wouldn't think about, like the row orientation. Just anything
and not just the row orientation, but our spacing too, Keith. That was the other thing that we noticed. The difference between the old block and the new block is, and Todd, you can talk on this a little bit. What is our spacing in the binaural block? It's 3 by.
So we're down to 6 foot row spacing and 4 foot
6 by 4
plant spacing, as opposed to generally 8 by 4 in those older plantings on the north half of the property.
That also helps with the shading aspect as well. To having those rows a little closer together, you're going to get a little more shading on the vines and on the fruit zone, which is important for the integrity of the fruit. The little more density means those plants don't have to hold quite as much fruit to get the yields that we want for sleight of hand.
The extra competition between the vines certainly reduces berry size and giving you better concentration in the fruit. And like you mentioned, that extra shade, it is shading the fruit from the neighboring rows a little bit earlier in the day and for the protection. But the flip side of that is you're also pushing back your harvest window. So in some years that's a good thing, more hang time, and in other years, cold years, it's you can be up against the edge of the end of the season. So it's a double-edged sword, but one that we think ultimately makes better wine year in and year out.
We think so too. I think this site is, as we mentioned, it's a little bit cooler, but 8 out of 10 vintages in Washington are on the warmer to hot side, and so. If it's only 2 years out of the 10 that you're dealing with these cooler vintages, last year, I call it a cool vintage only because we had that late start and that very wet start. I thought July and August and September and even 3 weeks of October were just absolutely incredible. That last week of October, I'm sure you could have done without. And just to be able to get tractors, it was, quite rainy. And even when you had a break in between the rain, it was difficult to get tractors into the vineyard because the soils were saturated. And when you have a hilly site with saturated soils, it's really difficult to get a tractor in there. So, but we appreciated appreciated all the hard work you guys put in 2022 for us, for sure. The wines are showing great. Keith tasted me through a few things a couple of weeks ago, and we're really excited about that vintage. I don't know if you're hearing the same thing from your clients or if you're hearing that from the Corliss team or the Trunch team, but we're pretty high on the vintage.
Yeah, I'm very excited to try what you've got in barrel, and I know from my winemaking staff, they're all very encouraged by initial quality of both fruit and what they're tasting as things are going ML dry. So I think it's going to be a vintage for the record books, and
we hope so. Keith, you have any extra questions for Todd?
No, I think that was a great conversation, and Todd, thanks for taking all of our questions. It's always fun to hear from the other side of it in a more detailed setting instead of just walking the rows and chatting. So it's fun to really dive in.
Oh,
Definitely,
I'm happy to help.
We're gonna do that. We're gonna do the same thing again with Red Mountain Vineyard here soon. I'll get you on the calendar, and we'll tee this back up, and we'll chat a little bit about Red Mountain. Like I mentioned, Daniel's gonna throw in some great photos and probably some stats and stuff for this interview. So when we actually get it posted up to YouTube, our YouTube channel, we'll send you the links so you can watch the final one. But Todd, thanks again for everything you do for us. We really do appreciate you and your crews. We know how hard you guys work. The communication that we have between our teams is great, and I think that it's one of the reasons the quality of the wines that we're making, in large part due to the work that you guys are putting in, and so we really do appreciate you guys. So thank you for everything.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Love working with you guys. Looking forward to yet another vintage 2023. Already getting started.
Of course.
Awesome. All right, guys.
Well, take care, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. We'll see you guys. For everybody's watching, thanks for joining us for our Vineyard series. We've got another one coming up next month. Just keep on checking back to this YouTube channel, and we'll try to get you all the information you need. If you find that you're still have questions for us, you know how to reach us. Just email Keith or I, and we'll try to answer all your questions. So we look forward to seeing you in our tasting room soon. Thanks.